So good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming today to our ELA Parent Workshop. Today's topic, as you can see, is reading and the Common Core learning standards. Before we get involved with this, I do want to introduce our staff here who will be helping to present today. So we have with us, Mrs. Grant is here, second grade. I'm going to try to go out of order here. Miss O'Sullivan is here, third grade. Miss Margolis is here, third grade as well. I've got Mrs. Leonard is here, Ms. Casaro is here for fourth grade, Mrs. O'Hara is here, and Mrs. Poley for fifth grade. So we do have some teachers who are going to be working with you because it's going to be an interactive type of workshop where we're going to put you to work a little bit to see how well you can respond and adjust to some of the Common Core reading standards that we teach your children. So like I say, our topic today is reading and the Common Core learning standards. And I know that you've heard a lot about Common Core, everything is Common Core, Common Core. So what is it and what isn't it? Okay? Basically, the Common Core is not a curriculum that we give to the teachers or that the state has provided for the teachers. It's not a curriculum for them to follow, but rather it is a set of standards focusing on goals and expectations and achievements that are set for your children. Teachers are allowed to determine how to reach these goals. And we're going to get into these goals. You're going to see the anchor standards for reading as we move this along. And then you're going to be participating in an activity that will allow you to work with some of what your children will be working with through the Common Core standards in reading. It emphasizes rigor. And I'm sure you've heard that word many, many times. It's rigorous. It's very rigorous. The bar has been raised for all children in New York State and across the country. And so what you're going to be seeing is a lot of in-depth reading, close reading, reading for meaning, finding evidence in text, which we're going to go over. I think long gone are the days when you and I, or I'm dating myself, but long gone are the days when we read with the Dick and Jane readers, see Spot runs fast. No longer, okay? So our passages are much more difficult, and the type of learning is much more involved, as you will see. The anchor standards for reading. One of the standards that's involved in the Common Core, key ideas and details. Now, the key ideas and details involves close reading, making logical inferences. It involves citing evidence from the text, going back into the textual material and being able to find the answer, prove your answer. Why did you come up with this? Well, it says in the text that, so I assume that or I know that. And then answer questions and discuss key ideas and details to support conclusions drawn from the text. Again, taking from the text and finding the evidence there. How many times have we asked children for an answer to a question, and they may have seen something on television, and automatically they give you what they saw on TV, and you say, you know, that's great, and you're probably right, but was that in the text? No, it wasn't in the text. Okay, so we've got to get them trained to go back into the text, find their information so that they can prove it from what they just read. So the key ideas and details, students also need to be able to find out what is this piece of text referring to. Can I pick out the main idea? Can I find the supporting details that support the main idea? Because in essence, afterwards, when they're finished with their reading, and last year we did something on writing, they all need to synthesize that and put it into writing. So they need to be able to put down what was the main idea and what are the supporting details for it. So all of this is involved with this anchor standard for key ideas and details. Craft and structure is another anchor standard. And so how do our students interpret words and phrases? And how are they used in text? Context clues. Can they determine the meaning of words and phrases, distinguishing from literal and figurative meanings? Very difficult sometimes. Do they understand the author's purpose? Why did the author write this? Was it to inform? Was it to entertain? Was it to educate? What's the purpose of this piece of writing? And then to understand the structure and to analyze the structure of the text, how maybe a chapter in a book or a verse in a poem can relate to the whole. Where does it fit in? How does it relate? You know that when your children start to read, they don't begin with chapter books. They eventually gradually get to a chapter book. So that also students at this point will begin to distinguish their own point of view from that of the authors. What do I think? And you see that reading has its own developmental way of progressing. The integration of knowledge and ideas. Reading and analyzing two or more texts. This is where comparing and contrasting comes in. And that's really a very, I guess, intricate and sometimes difficult concept for children to understand and to be able to write about when they're writing about something. It is difficult for them to be able to see something, the similarities, the contrasts, and be able to put it together. Where did I see that before? How can I compare this to that? How does this character in this story compare to another character in another story that we've read? What are their differences? So there's a lot of that involved with reading and understanding conflicts, characters, plots, main themes. The range of reading and level of complexity. By the end of the year, students should be able to read and comprehend complex literary and informational texts independently and proficiently. Now I say that by the end of the year because we can't expect them to be able to do that as soon as we start teaching them how to read. It's a progression. And so you say by the end of any given year, the expectation is that students should be able to read independently at the level that they can read independently, but where we're hoping to bring them to. Students should have that based on all of the instruction that we're giving them through these anchor standards so that they will come away with knowing how to read a piece of work, knowing that I've got to look for main ideas, details. I've got to look for the bigger picture, not just at the recall level. You know, can you tell me what so-and-so was wearing? Or can you tell me, you know, did they go to grandma's house or not? Those are simple recall facts. They need to be able to go a little bit more in-depthly to comprehend the true text and the meaning of what they've just been reading. So by the end of the year, it is our desired expectation and goal that they can read and comprehend a complex literary, your typical fiction books, and then your informational text, nonfiction, texts that are factual so that they can understand that at a higher level. And what you're going to be able to see this year and in all the years coming, and I'm sure you've seen some in prior years, your children are expected to be reading nonfiction books at home. Not just, you know, the fiction books that they like, but the nonfiction text. It's a whole different way of reading. It's reading for information, and your children will be involved more and more with that as you see as the coming years progress. And in the end, the expectation responding to literature. Can your children make text-to-text connections? Can they say, you know, I read another book that had the same type of story or it had the same type of problem in it, and wow, they make a connection that way. A connection to text and self. They read a story. Sometimes they say, you know, I went there and I actually saw what they're talking about, and it begins to make more sense to them. And then text to the world, current events around them. They might be reading an informational piece of text where, oh my goodness, I saw that on the news as well. And you know, that does ring a bell to me because I am familiar with that. I've seen it somewhere. I've seen it involved in a current event somewhere. Hopefully they'll be able to self-select books of interest because they will form a preference for certain authors. How many of you here have children who have a particular author that they love to read? They read them all the time. They can't wait for the next book to come out because they love it so much. You know that they're forming a preference there. They like the style that the author is writing in. Maybe they like the character that the author is writing about, and they want to follow that character. But the other thing is reflecting on text through collaborative conversations using appropriate vocabulary. You're going to be involved in collaborative conversation at the end of this workshop. We're going to engage you in some of that as well. But really what it is, we have our children partnering, pair sharing, turning around and talking to one another about a particular thing that they've read, so that it gives them a little bit more meaning. They're now internalizing it and they're speaking about it, so it makes more sense to them. And they're using the vocabulary. A little later on in this presentation, Ms. O'Sullivan is going to walk you through an overview of the Wonders program, and you're going to see just how vocabulary rich that reading program is, and the expectation that your children should be using that type of vocabulary, whether it's in class, whether it's through collaborative conversations, and even when they're writing their own sentences out, that they should be able to understand the meaning of the word and use it. The best thing that you can do with your children to really engage them in some strong vocabulary is to always, number one, have conversations with your children, and number two, use the appropriate vocabulary. You might think it's too high for them depending on age appropriateness, but I'll tell you something, they're sponges and they absorb it and they can't wait to use it. So the more they learn, the more they use it, the more proficient their vocabulary levels will be. And then lastly, can they assess or critique the text? I liked this book because, how many times have you seen that in a book report that your children have been doing? We want to know why, because we want to know what are the specific areas that they did like. Was it the conflict? Was it the character? Was it the style of writing? Did it entertain them for the purpose? So once they can put all of this together and they synthesize what they've read through conversation to putting it in writing, you see the level of reading and see how it progresses and how reading touches just about every aspect of their learning. And so reading is no longer, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, it's no longer the C-Spot Run, the Dick and Jane readers, and how simple it was just to be able to read with fluency, but to be able to comprehend. And one of my teachers and I were just having a conversation this morning about that, and we said, you know, children, when they're beginning to read, the concentration and focus is really on fluency. Can they decode a word? And then once they can get the sounds and the symbols and the phonemic awareness, can they now read word to word more fluently? But their focus is on getting to read that. It's not so much on comprehending what they're reading, it's can I read this fluently? And as they build fluency, comprehension comes into place. So there is a lot of scaffolding that goes on in the teaching of reading. Okay? So I think, yes, that's the end of the anchor standards at this point. So moving on, the district, because we are definitely watching your children, watching and monitoring their reading progress, we've moved on to STAR assessment. And the STAR assessment is it's a reading type of assessment where students will be sitting in front of a computer and they will be reading passages and they will be answering questions to see how far they are and what level they are in their reading. So the program has been implemented this year for the 2013-14 school year. It assesses the appropriate reading levels through passages and leveled questions. So as your children are reading and they're answering questions, if they're getting these questions correctly, they're moving on to the next, basically either at the same level passage or maybe higher level passage, just to see what reading level they're at so we can benchmark them. If they are not answering their questions correctly, then it lowers the level to see where they are at, so we can get an estimation as to where they are in their reading. So that, like I say, the passages and the questions adjust to their responses so that the reading level is adjusted. And the beauty of this is that it identifies specific areas and skills for us, the teachers, to focus on. So as the teachers are looking at the results of these assessments, they're seeing where these children may be having difficulty at this time. Does it mean that this is where they're going to be having difficulty throughout the year? Not necessarily. But at this time, and on this particular assessment, this is where they had difficulty. And as they move along, they may not. They may grow in one area and they may lose in something else. And it all depends on the type of assessment that they're taking. But at least it gives us a specific idea as to what we need to work on at this particular point in time and move it along. And it actually guides the teacher and the program instruction as to what I've just said. It guides them to do that. All right? questions about STAR assessment? Yes? I beg your pardon? Well, we're looking at doing it probably 4 times a year. September, again, probably early January, again, late March, and then in the spring, in May. Okay, 4 times a year to do these types of assessments. Yes?
Is that the one that was done with Mr. Rich? Is that in that computer room? Or is that
Some of them did, yes. Some of them took them in the computer lab. Some of them have not taken it yet. And yes, that's where they're doing it on the computer.
And then at that point, the program is individualized until, or individualized group-wise until
Yeah,
they reach the next.
it's more of let me see what this child is up to at this point, and then if there are any specifics that pop out about the whole class, we can hone in on that skill. If there's something in particular for an individual, we can at least look at that and say we need a little bit more help on this. Okay? It really does a tremendous job, I think, in giving us the information we need. Yes?
This is to replace the DRA
Yes.
assessment, so there's no one
Just about, yeah. It's really replacing the DRA at this point. It helps us to get that information that we need in a quicker way. In essence, it doesn't take us days to do this. It takes us maybe a half hour, where the whole class is doing it at their pace. It takes us maybe a half hour and gives us really targeted results that we want to see.
Is it timed in any manner, like for individual students?
Yeah, the questions are timed, and then they have a specific amount of time to do what they need to do. So in that regard, it's a little different.
Do you know approximately how long it will take for an
I don't
individual?
remember
About 90 seconds.
about
per
90
question.
seconds per question.
And how many questions?
It depends.
34.
34, yeah. Okay? So now I'm going to move on to reading. We have a question.
One more quick
Yes.
question. Will the teachers have the results to share with us in next month's meeting?
Yes and no. Basically, because it is the first assessment that we did, we want to make sure that as we give more assessments, it's a truer picture of your child. So we will do maybe a couple of more in between. I mean, we're targeted to do 4, but maybe some teachers want to do 1 extra one just to see. They could probably share with you overall, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where your child is at, per se. It's the first time any of our students have ever taken an assessment using the computer. So those are factors that we have to factor in. They might not be a true picture right now as to what they can do, plus the time aspect of it. So we want to hold back on that for at least this first time, and then later on in the year, probably we'll be able to use more of that information to help you along, okay? Because it is the first time that they've used the computer, okay? So now we move into the Wonders program, which is an incredible series that we piloted this last year in certain grades in K through 3. It was piloted, and we adopted it this year for grades K through 3. This reading program, Wonders, was developed for the Common Core Learning Standards. It was not in existence and then they pieced it together. It was developed specifically with Common Core in mind. Okay, it's aligned to the standards that is set by Common Core. And it does incorporate the rigor of Common Core. It also has provisions for differentiation to meet varied levels of students. There are level books on the same topic that students can read. It does provide for the ELL student so that we have ways in which to meet the needs of the ELL student through this program. And we are hoping to pilot this in grades 4 and 5 in January. We're just hoping for that. There's a possibility of that. We're not sure if we're going there yet, but there's a possibility of that. So I'm going to introduce to you Ms. O'Sullivan, who's going to give you a brief overview of the Wonders Reading Program.
Okay. Good morning. Just to give you a little snapshot of what your children do throughout a week in the Wonders Reading Program. Right now it's in 2nd and 3rd grade, and so the 2nd and 3rd grade teachers have been trained on how to use the program, and I was a pilot teacher last year, so I was able to implement in my class last year. Basically, it's a week-long week that they're spending on time for about between 5 and 7 days, depending on the class and the structure. The children are asked to introduce a weekly concept. They have a question, essential question. So for their essential question, it ranges in a larger scale question that deals with something that has happened in their life. And then by the end of the week, they're able to answer the question based on the stories they have read. So if this week my children are learning how does problem solving help them go and move on into creating inventions in their life? So we asked about how do you solve problems in school, or how do you solve problems in your daily life? So they see it as a big picture, and then they see it of how it will then work into the text. They've been reading stories on nonfiction pieces of work. We also study for genre, and we also study for strategy and skill. So they're introduced to the concept on Monday. They have very rigorous vocabulary words that are introduced. The vocabulary words go through their small text work, their anthology, their guided reading. So they're constantly seeing these words over again used. And there's a specific vocabulary routine that we use. We define the word for the children on Monday. We ask them a question, and then we ask them to give us an example of how they would use the word. So it's very structured on the vocabulary implementation, and that's a strong part of the program that we really appreciate for second and third graders going forward, reading more complex text. Then the strategies are an overall reading strategy, and the skill helps to back up that reading strategy. Right now my kids are working on ask and answering questions. What are you wondering about this text? What do you notice that the author has done with this text? And then our skill is cause and effect. So the cause and effect backs up why we're asking questions. They see these throughout the week in a small text. This is where we're teaching the concepts through their reading and writing text. And we work on this for about 3 days in one of the stories. So the genre stays the same, the strategy stays the same, and the skill. And then for about 2 days, after they're taught how to use all of those concepts, they apply it in an anthology, which is an anchor text. So it's a small, shorter story in the small text. It's a longer, extended piece of reading in this text. So when they go to apply all of these strategies in this text, they create greater meaning. So the stories are definitely engaging for the children. They really learn how to go back and analyze. We do a first read on Monday. On Tuesday, they revisit the story in the small text. We study genre, so we'll study all about the genre of the story and what it entails. On Wednesday, we'll go through and work on the strategy with that text again, that story, creating deeper meaning, and then we'll work on the skill as well. On Thursday and Friday we work in that anthology, and they apply everything that they've just been instructed in mini lessons to the anthology text. So one text is leading to help them in another text. Then when we do small group work, it still has the same genre, the same strategy, and the same skill, same vocabulary, same essential question. They're seeing it over and over again. They get to their small group, and they're practicing it in here as well. So there's many different levels that they are practicing so that they can create mastery with it. The program also leads into, they'll see the strategy for 2 weeks, and they'll see the skill for 2 weeks, and then the strategy will change, but the skill stays the same. And then we'll add in a new strategy, and then the skill will change. So they're able to see how the skill and strategy work together, which is a really great part of the program. After that, there is a research and inquiry where they can apply everything that they've learned in the 2 texts, and they can go off and read library books or search for other books on that genre and apply what they've learned about that genre to a story that they read in their everyday life. We also have a part of assessment that also helps us. It helps the teacher know, did they get the concept on genre? Did they understand the vocabulary for the week? Did they understand the strategy that we're teaching and the skill? So that we know, can we go back and reteach, or do we need to move forward because they've all grasped those concepts? Spelling is a huge part of the program as well. Your children are introduced to a spelling pattern, spelling rule. We use sound spelling cards to introduce that. And they work on different spelling activities through the week to foster that. And you might see some homework come home that has based on the spelling pattern that they're working on. Some children learn how to just memorize the spelling word and not necessarily know what is the pattern and how can we identify the pattern. So we go back and also teach that piece. So grammar and writing are also a big component. So your children will learn different activities that have to do with grammar, parts of speech, how to create sentences, complex sentences, subjects, predicates. And there are little mini lessons to go along with that the teacher incorporates throughout the week. And then the writing is based on what type of stories are we reading. And we do mini lessons, small mini lessons that take about 10 to 15 minutes throughout the week. And then during weeks 4 and 5 of our unit, they work on larger pieces of writing. So my children have been learning how to create a personal narrative, which now we're in week 4, so we started drafting, and we're starting to revise, and we're starting to edit, and then they will be publishing by week 5. So there's 5 weeks with each one unit that we will be working on. So it's very differentiated. If you have children that are approaching, because the program is so rigorous, the teachers have materials that work on the approaching level student. We have materials that are for the on-level student, on grade level, and we have materials for the beyond level student, so to challenge our higher level readers as well. And our reading intervention specialist also has WonderWorks, which is part of the program, that brings down the stories that we read to an acceptable level for, because it's text complex, for a reader that is approaching grade level. And also our learning specialists do have materials, and our ELL teacher has materials. So it's very cohesive. We also provide our speech and language teacher with some guided reading books that they can work in with their program. So pretty much everybody knows where everybody is in the program, and we balance our questions off one another. Did you see the way the children responded to that text today? Or we go back and forth with each other about questions that we notice, what we're wondering. So it helps us as teachers benefit our planning with the students as well. So far, that's where we are with our program.
Great. Terrific. Thank you for that, Megan. Megan just gave an incredible overview of the Wonders program as it relates to all of the components of ELA, not only the reading, but the writing as well, and the conversational piece, etc. It is a wonderful, comprehensive program, and our teachers truly have positive things to say about it. And since we piloted it and since we are using it this year, I've heard nothing but great things from the teachers coming from your children, how much they're involved in the conversations that they're having in their classrooms. So I'm happy that we've adopted this program, and I hope that we can continue it in the upper grades as well. Thank you for that overview. It was great. Now it's your turn to have a little fun, okay? So for the next 20 or 30 minutes or so, our teachers are going to be working with you on a particular skill that they teach from Common Core and from their reading program. They're going to teach it with you, and they're going to have you do a little work. So I'm going to ask if there are any 4th and 5th grade parents here, if you would take the tables that are in the back by those windows, and 2nd and 3rd, if you could just stay at these tables here, maybe in 2 tables, and our teachers are going to teach you a lesson. Okay, 2nd and 3rd.
We're still within the first unit. Oh, sorry. Through this text, Mrs. Sullivan's passing them out. The teacher, we are doing modeling of our thinking for how to tackle questions. So we're modeling through our shared piece. So we always, at the beginning of the text, this was a passage that we actually did in 3rd grade. This program is very rich with technology. There's application where the teacher can read the passage out loud, or the Wonders program can be implemented on the smartboard, and you can have parts or sections of the text read aloud to the class. So it just provides a different reader for the students. They're hearing different voices to build on fluency. Okay, so after we read through the entire text, typically Tuesday, we are doing our close read, and the teacher is modeling how to look closely at the text. They're modeling their thinking. They're sharing what is going on in their mind, and we call that a think aloud. So it's really, hey, what am I doing to tackle this type of text? So for
really raise the bar for them and have them become comfortable and confident when they do take the state test, to say, I've got this, I know the words, I know the language that they're using and talking about. Do we practice? We might practice when it gets closer, but the practice is more for how do you choose an answer and how do you bubble it in, because that's a little anxiety for the children. It's more like, what does it look like and how do I take it? So it's not as, for us, leading to test prep. We don't need to do that because that creates a lot of anxiety. So our program is going to prepare them for that.
Yeah, I just don't want to set up, for life.
No,
we don't
we
definitely
don't either. So we don't we don't discuss it. We have never discussed it. We don't bring it up. It's just, this is another day in our classroom.
after they've done them that they really are challenging. To be honest, I find them challenging for adults to do. So I need to kind of go on record for that, because every year when we give them, we're like, can you believe those pieces? That's what we always say. That's always where we are, because I believe it's challenging for the state to find pieces that really work well. So I'm just going to ask that you look at the question first, just so that you know this is what they're going to be expected. It says, the myth and the article both provide explanations for why evergreen trees keep their leaves in winter. How are the explanations similar and different? So the skill that we're using obviously is compare and contrast. And use specific examples from the myth and the article to support your answer. So we have you read that first before you attempt to read, so it gives you a little bit of a focus while you're reading the story. So as you go through, please feel free to underline information that you feel will help you. And right now we're going to ask you to read the two passages and underline any information that will be useful for when we fill out our grant organizer. No, but you're hoping they've internalized the process to some degree, so by the time it comes, they're thinking, oh, let me think this, and then they'll be able to go right to it. They've done it enough. Okay, that's what your hope is.
So this would be organized, they would have in common that might help you answer the question.
And this is the hard part
Yes.
that Mrs. O'Hara was talking about before.
Now you have to make that
I feel like
connection.
that's the most challenging piece. It's pretty easy to pick out what's in one story and then what's in the other story and look at it. It is a challenge to find something that they both share, information that they both share.
Especially since it's fiction versus non-fiction.
Okay, so then once the children have written their constructed response, they then are graded using the state rubric. And I'm just going to speak briefly about certain aspects of the state rubric. When we read them, and Mrs. O'Hara went on record as saying that this is a very difficult task, I'm going on record as saying grading them is a very difficult task. And you'll see, because we have some passages for you to grade. The first two criteria are the two that we're going to focus most on today. Generally, the bottom two has to do with the writing style, the cohesiveness of the writing piece, the organization, and the conventions of writing. And again, if you're looking at it holistically, unless the conventions allow you to not or prevent you from understanding it, that's usually not an issue when you're grading the piece. When you have to read a piece 6 or 7 times to understand what the child was trying to say, then that may be where it would affect them in a negative way. But the first two criteria have to do with the content of what they're writing and how well they're supporting their opinions using the information from the text. How they're making the connection from the fact that the leaves are small and narrow. How does that go on to explain, how does their piece go on to explain how that helps the tree keep its leaves? Looking at the fact that it has pointy leaves, to go on and explain, not just to state they have pointy leaves, but to make that connection that they shed the snow so it doesn't break under the snow.
I'm so glad that we got you all talking and asking questions and the appropriate questions. And I hope that all of your questions were answered. I know that there were a lot of good discussions going on at this end of the table, and I know that the 4th and 5th grade parents, they were really put to work, and I can see them shaking their heads and saying, oh my goodness, you know. But it is a lot of work, and as you see the progression from maybe from K through where we leave off in 5, the level of difficulty and the level of rigor that just keeps following them all the way up. So you got a little taste of what it's like to have somewhat of a reading and an integrated ELA course, the 4th and 5th grade teachers. And the 2nd and 3rd grade parents, I'm very happy that you were able to get your questions answered about the Wonders program, which we are currently using. But now that we're back in our spots, I do have a couple of reflection. And part of what we do in reading is we offer and provide opportunities for students to reflect on their learning Not just about what they read, but was this difficult for you? How do you know you were able to understand this? And they start thinking about how they learned. So now I'm going to present these questions to you, reflection questions. And what I'd like you to do, I'd like you all to think back to when you first learned how to read. When did you know that you had learned how to, and what were you able to do after reading a story at that level? So I'm going to give you a little time to reflect, and then we're going to do a little turn and talk, so we can have a little collaborative conversations here. When did you first learn how to read, and when did you know that you learned how to do it? What was it that you said, wow, I know how to read now? What was it? Think about it, turn and talk. What were you able to do after you finished a story? Think about it. If you need a partner, move to a table, do a little partner share, turn and talk. So now we're at that basic level. When did you know you had advanced from a basic reader to a more sophisticated one? Now what were you able to comprehend? Turn and talk for a couple of minutes. Turn and talk. What were you able to comprehend at that level? Turn and talk. See what you can come up with. Lastly, when did you know that you had, and I should have put mastered in quotes, mastered the skill of reading? If we have mastered it at all yet, we don't know. And then what higher levels of skills could you now synthesize or integrate? Beyond the book report, beyond I can compare and contrast. Is there anything else that, as you're reading as an adult at this point, or is there anything else going on that you can now do because of something you've read? Think about it, turn and talk, and see how the levels have built from I can read Cat in the Hat with fluency, I can now read something with information and make a book report out of it. I can now do what at this point? Have a little turn and talk for a minute or two. See where it's taking you. They can actually get to all of these areas so that they can become really great readers and be able to have that comprehension level where they can take a piece of text, read it, and have all the components there for them to be able to talk about it, critique it, delve more deeply into it, to really fully comprehend what it is they're reading. Okay? So I hope that you found this parent workshop helpful to you. I heard a lot of your questions, a lot of great discussions here. I'm so happy to know that you now have a better understanding of the Wonders program, and I know that the 4th and 5th grade parents have a better understanding of what exactly their children are doing in terms of reading and being able to synthesize what they've read to be able to come up with comparisons and contrasts and be able to write about that. So you see the levels of where we're going, and I hope that this was an informative session for you, and one that at least opens you up to what it is that we're doing in reading and how it relates to the Common Core. So I want to thank my teachers for coming. They did a great job. Thank you, Dr. Moran, and thank you, Mr. Hatter, for joining us as well. Thank you for having us. And thank you for all of your questions, your concerns, your input, and for just participating today. Thank you so much. Thank you.